All right, and we are live. Finally, we got the streams connected, and we are live to go with Philly.net here on Wednesday evening. Happy that you guys are here to join us. For those of us who are watching online, we're live on Twitch and YouTube, and got an audience that's starting to pull together in the chat room here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill and to Rob, who are going to present tonight's topic around Jupyter notebooks. So guys, go ahead and take it away.
Good to see everybody again, even though we can't see you in person. I can certainly see Rob, and I still think he looks like the guy from the show Devs. So I am going to share some slides I have and run the slideshow. So welcome to the Philly.net online community. We've been doing recordings like this for almost 2 years. But now that we're all stay at home, this has taken on much more importance. And we are happy to announce we're going to get into a regular schedule, do these twice a month. So for those of you that have been Philly.net attendees for so many years, this is our favorite quote. It comes from our famous code camps, and whenever you win a prize, you have to yell "woohoo!" So tonight I'm going to cover Visual Studio Codespaces for about 25 minutes. Then Rob is going to cover Jupyter notebooks inside of Visual Studio Code. We're going to, as I said, do 2 meetings a month. So normally we would do a hands-on lab and a monthly meeting. We'll sort of follow along in that vein. And so starting in June, Rob and I are going to do Visual Studio Code tips and tricks and look at some of the latest extensions. There are now over 20,000 extensions that work in Visual Studio Code. It's all the rage. So that'll be an interesting meeting. In June, we're going to have a joint meeting with the Philly Azure group. And I think Brian Minissi, another MVP, is going to deliver that and probably have a DevOps focus. And then our lab in July, this is a major new announcement. I'll talk about build in a moment, but basically you'd have a new terminal in Windows 10, and that terminal can run a full copy of Linux in your machine. And we're going to talk about how a developer might take advantage of that. And then also we're going to take a look at PowerShell. And the new PowerShell 7 now works not only in Windows, but in Linux environments, and it's gaining a lot of traction in the broader cloud space. If anyone else is interested in speaking, certainly contact us. The plan with Rich's help, Rich Ross Broadcasting, we're going to try and do at least an hour every other week. And come in the fall, normally we would have a code camp. That code camp will not be in person. There's no guarantee that the pandemic crisis will let us all meet in large groups by that time. So we are looking at the possibility of doing sort of a virtual code camp early in the fall. And hopefully we'll get back to meeting at Microsoft sometime in 2021. Right now, as we speak, Microsoft is in the middle of doing their famous Build conference, and that is their top developer event. Normally it's held in Seattle, and of course everything is online right now, and they're doing an amazing job. I just awed what they could do with Microsoft Teams, but they threw together a registration site. They have about 350 sessions in 48 hours. And since this is a worldwide focus, they are actually running these around the clock for 48 hours. So some of them you can watch on replay. Some of them you have to be live. But the wonderful thing is they didn't charge for this. Probably a little late to tell all of you, but had you signed up at mybuild.microsoft.com, you might still be able to register now. I don't know, but you could at least see some of the sessions later tonight and tomorrow. So my topic is one of the big new things they talked about at the Build conference, and the topic is called Visual Studio Codespaces. It is brand new. The working title over the last couple of months has been Visual Studio Online, but they decide to call it Codespaces. That's the new marketing term. And if you go to this shortened URL, aka MS Codespaces, it'll take you to the page where you sign up. So, what is Codespaces? Well, it's basically a hodgepodge of a bunch of Microsoft technologies that all work together to allow you to build development environments really, really fast. So normally, if you were in a shop and you were going to hire somebody to come in and do some work with you, you'd have to requisition a laptop. You'd have to install Windows or whatever operating system you're working with. You'd have to install Visual Studio and a whole bunch of add-ons. You might have to do SQL Server. And then you'd have to set up their environment with the proper security and things so they can actually run the code. Oftentimes, this can take quite a bit of effort. So a lot of companies, they resort to virtual machines. Sometimes they just have a laptop image. This is supposed to simplify all this. And basically what it does is it builds you a cloud-based development environment, and you can spin this up literally in a minute or two. And I will demonstrate that very soon. Now, you can use this not only for doing quick pull requests, just to look at some code and check it, or you could use it as your full-time development space. The advantage is that you can get to this from any machine using a browser anytime you want. And you can edit the code either online using an online editor that works exactly like Visual Studio Code, or you can use Visual Studio Code itself with extensions, or you can use Visual Studio 2019, although that is right now in private preview. Technically, what's happening in the background is the code you need and the development environment and all the tools, the NPM packages, the NuGet packages, are all installed in a what's a Kubernetes container? It's a Kubernetes container. But basically, they're using container technology hosted in Azure, and you can run that in a Linux environment or a Windows environment. If you're in a Windows environment, you actually get a copy of SQL Server. And this is going to have full integration with GitHub and NPM, both of which are now owned by Microsoft. And you'll actually be able to go to GitHub and go to one of your repositories, and there'll be a big button there that says, open this in Codespaces. You'll click it. It'll take your entire project, your repo, and it will build a Kubernetes container, get it all set up, and you'll be able to edit the project within a minute or two. It's fascinating technology. So as I said, you can bring your own tooling. I'm going to show you both the browser-based VS Code and also the Visual Studio Code with an extension. But bear in mind that you will be able to use full Visual Studio, and they do have a command line interface. And the command line interface lets you automate things like setting up new environments and initiating services and things like that. Now, since you're in the Visual Studio world, you have full remote access using Live Share. What that means is you can set up one of these Visual Studio Codespaces and you can invite someone else to it, and they can be using their Visual Studio, and that you can both connect in and be editing the same code at the same time, commenting to each other, messaging, and all of that wonderful peer programming stuff. The online editor also supports IntelliCode, so you have the Azure AI aided code enhancement, and that's going to be very useful. And finally, if you have a large development shop and you already have things like virtual machines set up, there is a way for you to add your own self-hosted environments so that, for instance, the containers you run would actually be running on your hardware, and they would still appear in the Codespaces menu, and your workers could share that way. So a lot of very interesting possibilities with this approach. So if you're interested, you should sign up for the 2019 preview. That's for Visual Studio 2019. Right now, it only makes C# and C++ projects, but they plan to extend this to other technologies like Python, JavaScript, etc. This is not free. Since you are running these environments inside of Azure, there is a pricing schedule. So I have a link here. Just search for Codespaces pricing. They still use the old Visual Studio Online reference here. I'm sure that'll be updated soon. But basically, if you want to have a virtual machine all set up with multiple cores and a bunch of memory so that you can really work hard on a project you're doing, you know, it might cost anywhere from $10 to $20 per month. And you'd have to compare that against the cost of buying that brand new Microsoft Surface Surface Book 3 that costs like $2,500. So anyways, so there's some good links here for you, and there's the FAQ has a lot of good detail in it. One of the things I will point out is that this technology is designed so it can be used by partners, and what you're going to see is development companies like, say, Telerik, or training companies like Pluralsight are going to jump on this bandwagon, and I think you're going to see in the future, when you watch a Pluralsight video, you'll be able to click on a button and actually open up the code already in a code space. Here's some other links. So if you want to find these, I mean, just search for Visual Studio Online Training. I'm going to show you the quick starts in just a moment. But the other thing I will mention is that since GitHub is really, really getting well integrated into the Microsoft development space, you're going to see that every repo you have, there'll be buttons there that you can just open your projects right in Codespaces without having to download them and set up your own environment, which is can be attractive. So at this point in time, I am going to switch over and show you what things might look like if you were going to use Visual Studio Codespaces. So to do that, I have to stop sharing, and then I will share again. Hi, Rob. Are you still awake? Excellent. And I think this is the right browser. So the URL for now is online.visualstudio.com. I don't know if they're going to rename that to Codespaces, but the header, of course, says Visual Studio Codespaces. And it basically says learn more. So if you click learn more, it'll take you to the area that sort of looks like Visual Studio Code, the same coloring, the same marketing approach. So you might want to read some of this if you want to get up to speed on what exactly this can offer. Notice that you can sign up for the 2019 preview. You can also get started right away in Visual Studio Code. The other link here is the pricing, and I did mention that it's not free. There's some costs. It depends on how much you're going to develop. The $20 a month thing has to do with somebody that's going to leave their development running 24 hours a day. If you're not going to do that and you're going to suspend and only use it occasionally, the price goes way down. Because Azure is so clever and meticulous, they actually bill all this by the second. So I'm going to sign in. And when you sign in, of course, you need some kind of happy Microsoft account. And it'll come in and you'll see I already have some Codespaces made. Now, up here at the top, there is something called a plan. So you have to make a plan, and that basically, if you see where my drop down is, You'll see it's tied to some subscription. That is one of my Azure subscriptions. It is a resource group, which means that all the things that I'm creating here are stored in one resource group, so I could do billing. I could do my billing detail per resource group and understand how much all of this is costing to support my developers. We're not going to create a new plan, but you must have a plan to get started. And then after that, you create something called the Codespace. Now, I already have two here, and you'll see that they're sitting and they're suspended. But I'm going to go through a very simple quick start, and I'm going to create a Codespace. And this is actually the simple tutorial they have. But a Codespace has a name. So I already made this one. So I'll call this my quicker environment, because the second time I should be able to do it faster. And this is a really, really, really simple project. It only basically has one JavaScript file in it, but that's from Git. It's a public repository from Microsoft. Notice that I can pick different size machines. I'm going to go with the standard, 4 cores, 8 gigs. That's going to cost a little bit more money. And then it's going to say that if I walk away from my machine, get distracted, it's going to suspend. And if it suspends, I don't get charged for it, which is very useful. Okay, I'm going to click Create. And it's going to go out and do its dirty work. Now, what's going to happen by default is it's going to connect me to the online editor, which is essentially Visual Studio Code running in a browser. I'm still in, right now I'm in Google Chrome, and I am connected, and it's flickering a little bit up here at the top, not sure why, but behind the scenes, it's connecting to Azure. It's creating a bunch of resources, which I could go into Azure if I had more time today and show you exactly what it creates. But it has this real nice log that it shows you that it built a container. That's a Kubernetes container. And then it runs the container, and then it goes inside the container, and it pulls all my code down from GitHub and gets it ready to start. Now, once it's done, I can close the creation log. And you'll see here that I have basically a Visual Studio Code environment. It has a bunch of node modules, if you're familiar with JavaScript programming. The Visual Studio Code window here has most of the same features that you would be used to if you were doing true Visual Studio Code. So first thing we'll do is we'll go look at the main page, which is in markup. And since that's in markup, I could edit this if I wanted to. But the other thing I can do is I can, if I can remember the keystroke, Control-Shift-V actually shows the markup to me already formatted, which is really nice. And then I can swap back and forth. And if I click here, it goes back and shows me the source. So that's pretty useful. And then I can actually put them side by side. So if I want to do something really simple, like, I don't know, say Bill was here. Of course, I need to extend my little line. Okay. So you can see the changes in real time, but you also see the M there. It means this has been modified. So I'll get to that in a moment. We want to be able to show our changes. What else do we got here? Well, we got an outline. The outline at the bottom shows us the different parts of the document. So I can click here. It actually moves through the document. That's pretty useful. I have a timeline. It shows me what I've done, what changes I made. And then if I have any NPM scripts, I could actually run those. Since this is a full Visual Studio Code environment, I do have the ability to add extensions. This one's live share, which I'm not going to demonstrate today. We'll do that in our lab in 2 weeks. Here I could connect to the GitHub repository, look at my code. I could do Remote Explorer. I could go and look at my extensions. So you see the same extensions that you would use on your desktop version of Visual Studio Code, you can also pull into the browser-based versions. If you go up here, it will actually show me my changes. So if I click on this, it'll actually show me I want to click on README. It'll show me what changes have been made, which is very useful. And then finally, what I could do is I could just commit all this, but I'm not going to do that right now because I've got to actually run this and show you something useful. Okay, so if this is running in a remote container somewhere in Azure, how am I going to be able to test the output of this? And the output is very simple. It's a simple JS file, and it just says, hello world from VS Online. So to make this work, what you do, like any project, is we can go up here and we could press function 5, and that'll actually run this. And see on the bottom here, it says running on localhost 3000. If I click that, what that actually does is opens up a browser window, and they're using port forwarding so that the container that's running in Azure is actually at this address, but that is ported from the localhost 3000 on the container, and they expose this so you can run your own browser and test your own website. And that's very useful because then you can test in a phone, you can test in different types of browsers. So now that I demonstrated you can do that, what happens if we make a change? So if we say hello world from Philly.net, and we stop the compilation, we have to run it again, and then we run again, it should allow us to click again, we connect to the port, and we should be able to see the changes we made to our application. So in a nutshell, that's basically how the browser online works. Now, the other thing it does have on the bottom, it does have the debug console. It has your output window. It shows you any problems, and this is just ones that the JavaScript they wrote doesn't conform to their lint standards. You can disable that. And finally, you have a bash terminal. So you can do things like you can do an ls, you could do an ls node modules and see all the files in your file system that's stored on the container in the cloud. So you can get a lot of work done this way. Now on the bottom, you'll notice there is a button to do a live share session. There is a there's a button to do your GitHub and commit your branches. And then finally, there's a Codespaces button. And if you click on Codespaces, if you look up top, you'll see that there is an extension built into this. And that allows you to do things like disconnect, open in VS Code, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect. And it takes me back to an empty browser. And then I'm going to do a back button and go back to Codespaces. And the reason I wanted to do that is you now see I have an environment here that I just created today at 7:24. And this environment is available. The others are suspended. If I wanted to reconnect to this, I would just connect. But this is sort of interesting. Watch this. I'm going to change the settings. So to do that, I have to suspend. Then I'm going to say, you know, this is really a small project. There's no reason for me to pay a premium. So I'm going to use a smaller Linux container. I'm going to apply that. Then I'm going to connect again, and it'll open up the browser again. But this time, I only have two core processor cores and 4 gigs of RAM. So I'm saving a couple pennies per month on my development cost. Fascinating stuff. Now, I only have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to try and do a real quick demo of using Visual Studio Code as an alternative. And let me see if I can get that set up for you. So, but I think this has run its course. We sort of understand how this works. I would have to sign in to GitHub if I'm going to, let's see, that window's done. All right, let's go back here because I just want to see my Codespaces. Now, the last thing I want to demonstrate is I want to use Visual Studio Code. And to do that, I need to share my copy of Visual Studio Code. And I will stop sharing the browser. And I'm going to share my Visual Studio Code if I can find it. Like many of you, I have a dozen windows open. Oh, come on. I think it's this one. Yeah, so that's Visual Studio Code, just, you know, opened, ready to do something interesting. Okay, so here's the deal. If I go to extensions, there is an extension for Codespaces. Mine's already installed. It has instructions. Probably be useful to read those. Okay, so here's what we like to do. We want to create a new environment. So to do that, I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to go to Codespaces Sign In. And when I do that, if I did it correctly, it's supposed to sign into I think I have it. Connect to Codespace. Okay. And in the essence of time, I'm going to connect to the VS Code environment that I already made earlier today. And let's see if it's able to do that. So what I was going to show you is basically when we created a code space in the browser, it had me fill in 4 things, the size of the machine, the name of the code space, etc. You can do all that right from within VS Code by just typing stuff up in the command palette. But I want to give Rob time to do his, so I'm going to open one that I've previously created and show you that it's basically the exact same project. Now, the difference here, for those of you that are paying attention carefully, this is actually the desktop version of Visual Studio Code. It is not the browser version. And that's why you don't see the browser bar at the top. Okay. And notice it has the same code here. It has the same server JS, you know, same functionality. It does, you can do source code control and all that nonsense. It has the same outlines. So it works almost identical, which is very nice. That's the whole idea, is that this and the online version are supposed to match. Now, since this is running on my desktop, what's actually happening here? Well, they have a lot of technology in Visual Studio and in Visual Studio Code to do remote debugging and remote development. So using that technology, technically the source code we're looking at here is in the container in Azure, but when I connect with Visual Studio Code, it brings that source code down and lets me look at it remotely and actually debug it. But when I go to compile, it's actually going to compile up in the cloud in my container. So if I do an F5 and run this, I still get that ability to call the browser, but you can't see the browser because I'm only sharing my Visual Studio Code window. I'd have to share my browser as well, but just take it from me, it worked. And I saw, and it actually, when you run the Visual Studio Code, it's much faster than doing everything with the browser online. So now that we've established that, you can use, as I said, you can use Visual Studio Code in the browser. You can use the real Visual Studio Code. The green icon at the top means I'm using the Insider Edition. It's very new, latest build. And you can also eventually use Visual Studio 2019. They're working out the kinks on that. So I think this is worth giving a try. I think the fact that you can build these environments and so quickly is wonderful. And somewhere behind the scenes, there's actually a sort of a recipe that builds your development environment. I think it uses YAML files for that. And that's a little more advanced. We're not going to get into that today, but at least you saw the value of what this tool could do in your development environment. And hopefully you give it a try. At this point in time, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Mr. Rob.
All righty. Well, that's cool. I like that. They showed a lot of that at the on build. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Jupyter notebooks. So what are Jupyter notebooks? Well, they are they used to be called IPython notebooks, but now they're called Jupyter notebooks. But Microsoft has a slight twist on it, of course, because they're Microsoft. So they call them Azure notebooks, but they're really just Jupyter notebooks running in Azure. And right now it's still in preview, at least the last time I checked it is. So how's it work? Well, basically it sets up an environment inside of Azure and lets you run some stuff. So let's just see if I can get something shared here. And I think that's the one I want. And let's see, how does that look? Am I sharing it? There it goes. All right. Okay, so if you notice up here at the top, yes, I see it now. So if you go to notebooks.azure.com, that's how you get to these things, and it talks all about Jupyter notebooks in here. So the way this works right now, and you can see up here it says preview. So right now it's still running preview, and what you're doing is you're actually running basically a VM or a container type situation where you've got different things set up inside of your notebook. So you can run either Python 2.7, 3.6, 3.5. You can run R if you want to learn about that, and you can run F#. And you can think of this thing as a little REPL for those different languages. There are some limitations because basically it's still a preview, but they limit it to 4 gigs of memory. So if you've got something that's going to take up more than that, you probably need to look at something different, or you have to, I think they offer you a CAPTCHA to let you continue to run the notebook. It also, it's 4 gigs of memory and 1 gigabyte of data is what it allows. So when you come into this, you can see you've got different things. I'm logged in right now in one of my accounts, and I'm going to go to my projects, which I shouldn't have any projects in this account, which I don't, which is good because I didn't want to have anything. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through setting up a notebook, adding some code to it, and running through the stuff, and we'll see how it works out. So let's see. First thing we want to do, obviously, is to create a new notebook. So up here, it says there's a little plus with new project. Now, I've seen in some of the tutorials and stuff, it doesn't say new project. It just has a little plus there. I'm assuming they've been updating this stuff as they've gone along. And I like that they say memorable name, because you don't want to forget these things. So I'm just going to call it PDN. Let's see, 2020. All right. I'm not going to make this one public. I do not want to README in this one, but you can set that up if you want to. So basically, we're setting up a little project that can have multiple files in it. And when I hit create, it goes out and it does its thing. And eventually, we'll get to my project. So here we are with my project. And you can see everything is pretty much empty. And what we're going to do is we're going to upload. And so some of these icons for some of these buttons are a little bit cryptic. So we're going to upload a file from a URL into our project. Or you can just create a new file and add stuff by hand if you wanted to. But we're going to do it this way. And I'm going to do it from a URL. And I got a URL here. And destination name looks good. Cricket chirps. Yeah, I trust this. And we're going to do this. And there it is. So it uploaded a file to our system. So what is in this file? This is just some data, chirps per minute and temperature. So it's basically for crickets and how often they chirp and what the temperature is. It's just a CSV file. It's pretty simple stuff in here. All right. So the other thing we want to do is we want to set up a requirements file. And what this is used for is if we want to set up, always have things installed in our notebook, we can set up a requirements file that allows us to have that pre-built when we open up the notebook. Or if we share it and somebody else wants to use it, it gets used that way. So we're going to create a file from scratch. By the way, that's the crickets thing there. So get back here. My project. So we're going to create a file from scratch, blank file. And we're going to call this requirements because that's what we have to call it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put some code in here. I copied that correctly. Got to edit the file first. There we go. All right. So basically, we're saying we want to use Matplot, this version, NumPy, Pandas, and this other scikit-learn, and these different versions. So we're going to save that file. Okay. And now on the project settings, in order to use this requirements file so that it knows that it needs to use it, we have to go into project settings and environment. And we want to add a requirements file, and it's called requirements. And we're going to select version 3.6, and we're going to save that. So now it knows about our requirements. So next time it starts things up, it'll know what it needs to load automatically. And then so far, we haven't actually created any notebooks yet. All we've done is added files to our project. So now we want to actually create and do some work with a notebook. So we want to create a new notebook. And we're going to call this one something silly like this. And we're going to use Python 3.6. But you can see you've got the different Python versions plus R and F#. So if you want to learn F#, you want to learn R, you want to do some Python work, this is a great way to get started with that stuff. All right. All right. So now we've got it here. Let's take a look and see what we've got. So this is now a Jupyter notebook. And we can sit here and say, yes, we can wait for this stuff, but it'll get ready in a second. So let's take a look at what we've got up here. So we've got our file menu system stuff up here, files, edit, view, all that kind of stuff. We've got a save button, some quick buttons in here. We've got a run button, so we can run our notebook. We've got this code. It says code, but this allows us to specify what we want in a particular cell. So if we're running code, we're running markdown, we want to do some other stuff, we can set the cell to that type. And I'll show that in just a moment. And then over here, it shows you what you're running. So Python 3.6, and this open circle here says it's not doing anything at the moment. It's just sitting here. So that's the quick tour of what we're looking at here. So what we want to do now is we're going to put some markdown in our notebook. And markdown is nice to use in here because we can use it as, in essence, as comments or as instructions on what somebody needs to do if they open up our notebook and want to play with it. So we're going to change this cell type to a markdown, and we're going to copy some stuff into it. So you can see this is more than just a single line. This is a whole bunch of stuff that we're putting into this cell. And the interesting thing is that even though it's markdown, if we want to convert it into the HTML that it's representing, we actually have to run it. So let's run this markdown, and it turns it into nice looking HTML, and we can continue on. Also notice that after we've run it, we also get a new cell to put more stuff into. Okay. So we're going to put some more markdown in our notebook here, and we're going to run that. Now I'm running these one cell at a time. I could run them all at once. That's an option. But for right now, we're just going to run them one at a time and see what we're doing here. Okay, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to start putting in some bash commands into our cells so that we can install some extra stuff, which is basically, this is similar to what we put in the requirements, but we've also can run this here, and it's code, so we're just going to run it as is. Now this might take some time to finish. And there it goes, and it's starting to run. And if we look up here, we can see that this is still a solid circle, so it is still running. It's busy doing something. And it's trying to load all this stuff up. Now, some of this stuff we've already got. Some of it, it doesn't need to go out and get anymore. So that's why we're getting all these messages. Now, this can look a little bit
Hey, Rob?
confusing. Yes.
Can I relay a question while we're waiting?
Absolutely.
So from the chat, basically Rob is asking, Mad Sloth is asking, how would you compare this experience to the out-of-the-box Jupyter notebooks?
Well, the nice thing about this is that you don't have to do any setup to have it work, and you get a complete environment. So basically, instead of having to install Jupyter notebooks on your machine or use the browser, this gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you want to do with your notebooks. And you can save them and keep them here and not have to worry about doing anything on your system. And you can share them from here, and people can grab them right from here, and it works great. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Sure. All right, so we've got a bunch of output here. We really don't want to look at all this output. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it off. So there's this cell menu up here. Now, before we were using this little drop down to change what type of cell we're working with. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use this one, and we can do the same thing. We can change the type of cell here, but what we want to do is we want to turn off the output. So we want to just toggle the output. And of course, if I got to be in the right cell to do that, so I didn't have the right one selected. So let's do toggle again. So there, now it's all cleaned up. So the output's still there, but we've just hidden it because it's a bunch of extra stuff we don't really care that much about right now. All right. Okay. Let's see. We're going to put in some more markdown because, you know, we always want more markdown. And we're going to run that. Yeah. All right. So now there's a bunch more cells we're going to do. We're actually going to start putting some Python into some of these cells. So I'm just going to run through and add the code in so that we have time. And I'm just going to run them one at a time for right now. And the reason why I'm running them all one at a time is because we want to make sure that any dependencies that we're creating inside of our cells are there in case they're needed later on. So now let's actually put some Python in here. So let's run that, see if it works. And there it goes. Looks good. Okay. We don't have to worry about this. So what it did was it went out and it read our CSV file and it displayed the output here. Pretty straightforward. Let's put some more markdown in. So you can see as we go along here and we start and we're doing this, we're creating something that somebody else could come in. So let's go back up to the top, for example. So this is an example linear regression. They could go through all this stuff, read it, see the code we're doing, and be able to follow along and run the notebook themselves if they wanted to. So that works wonderfully. Put some more code in and we'll run that. Did I not run it? Okay, it ran. And we'll put some more markdown in. That one. And let's see. Oops, yeah, more code. So, okay, that's good, fine. We're just gonna keep going for right now. Eventually, we're gonna get to a spot that actually looks interesting. So you get this, you can see right now it's doing predictions on different things. Cool stuff. And let's see, where are we now? Just a couple more. And we'll be done. Oops, my mistake. Had the wrong markdown. Had the wrong type in there. There you go. Simple enough to fix. And let's run this. Did I run it? Oh, it thought it was, I had the wrong type again. All right, so we're running some more stuff here. All right, let's try this again. See if we can get, there we go. So here you go. We can actually see some output here, a little graph showing our distribution of chirp counts versus temperature, chirps per minute, that kind of stuff. Pretty cool stuff. And then let's just put in one more mark down here. And we'll run that. Okay, pretty cool. Now, what we probably want to do is, since we've already got these things installed in our notebook, we can comment these things out so that when we run it again, if we run the whole thing, we won't redo these because we've already got them here. So it shouldn't need to rerun that stuff. And it'll save a little bit of time. And then what we want to do is, just to prove that everything works the way it's supposed to, let's go up and we'll go into kernel. We will restart and clear the output. Yes. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that everything we've got is okay to run. And then we should be able to do, so we should see, yep, there's no output. This one actually we can get rid of, but we'll leave it there for the time being. So there's no output showing. So what we want to do now is we want to do a cell run all. So this should run through the entire notebook. And let's see if it actually is generated. So this is an issue that it comes up with sometimes, where it gets confused as to what you want. So you can just rerun that one cell to get the graph to show back up again. But basically, so what we've done is, this wouldn't have worked. This part here would not have worked with the graph if the other previous things had not run, because we had to actually go out and get the data and do some other stuff with it. So this proved that, yeah, even though we didn't get the display right away, we ran the cell, we got it, and it proved that we were able to run through our entire notebook. We didn't have any errors. So this is something we could share out to other people if we wanted to explain or show how to do a linear regression using Python. So now we've got this running. So what we probably want to do is we want to do a file save. We want to, and checkpoint. So the nice thing about the checkpoint, what that allows you to do is, if we were going along and let's say we published this out, and we gave it to people to play with, and they wanted to try and make some changes to our notebook, they could do save and checkpoint along the way. And if they made a mistake, or if they screwed something up really badly, they could go back to a checkpoint, sort of like a save point in time, and be able to start back over again and continue on. Another way to go about doing that would be to say, well, let's, if I want to do some experimentation, I'll just create a new cell and do my experimentation in that extra cell. And if it screws it up, it's just that one cell and I can get rid of it. So that's the other way to go. And what you can also do, although we are probably near the end of time, if you wanted to, you could take this notebook, you could export it out, and then bring it into Visual Studio Code. There is an extension of Visual Studio Code for Python from Microsoft that would allow you to do some debugging in here. You could set breakpoints and do that kind of stuff. But you could just take this whole notebook, move it into that, do your testing, run through your, do your debugging, make sure everything's right, fix it the way you want, save it, and then import it back in to here, and then you have it available to you. So that is the quick version of how to play with Azure notebooks or Jupyter notebooks, however you want to call them. And then if we go back to my projects, we can see that I have my project is sitting out here. It's still running. We should be able to stop that. It's running on the free stuff. You can come back in here. You can, kill it if you want to.
You don't know how to stop it, do you?
It's right here. Shut down.
Gotcha.
Peanut gallery is spoken here. Huh? All right, so there, you shut it down. And then if I go back to my projects, it should not be running now. It still says it's running. Oh, well, we'll let it go. It's not going to hurt anything. And so that's it. From here, you can also do some other things. You can upload to a GitHub repo. So you could have it sitting out there so people could grab it and play with it. There's other things you can do as well, like you can make it a public project so people can go get it and play with it themselves. And there's a few other things you can do with it as well. So that's pretty much the short version of the Azure notebooks, which are also Python or Jupyter notebooks. And you see it's running on free compute, so it's not costing anything. So you can go out and play with it and do what you want. And here's the share, so you can share it. I can copy the link for it and give it out. People can grab it and do what they want with it. So that's how that works. So, any questions?
Awesome,
Hey, Google,
thanks.
can you play cricket sounds?
Does it play cricket sounds? It does not play crickets. Oh, there you go.
Isn't that perfect?
Yes.
Not,
All right.
not completely. We had some people in the chat room. Bill, there's one other question that I missed from earlier around your session. Let's see. Z-Man Philly was asking. Roll back to this. Because you're using Visual Studio Codespaces, and there is a charge for that. So that's a per minute charge? Oh, sorry. Is there a per minute charge when you're doing it locally?
Yes, because the code is actually in the container on the cloud. So if you want to absolutely not spend any money, buy your own laptop and run all the stuff and configure it locally, as you've been doing for the last several decades. However, that has a cost too. I mean, there's a lot of time involved to keep your notebook up to date if you're working in a complex project for a client or working for multiple clients. It can be very, very confusing to get all the stuff running all in the same machine. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people rely on containers these days to keep all of the things clean and separate all your projects from each other. But if you're running it in the cloud, yes, you get charged per second, not per minute.
Excellent. Cool. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that I saw in the chat room.
So one other comment, that what Rob just showed, the ability to run notebooks in Azure. When we do our next lab, which is in 2 weeks, we're going to be going into all the wonderful advanced things you can do with Visual Studio Code. And what you're going to see is that you can now run notebooks in Visual Studio Code. And in addition to Python, you also can have C# notebooks. So yes, you can actually run C# code and have it show the result of the code right in those little blocks that Rob demonstrated. And that has some very interesting possibilities for learning, documentation, etc.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Glad to have you guys back live streaming and getting Philly.net meetings up and running again. Love the schedule going forward. And I do have one quick note to throw up there for folks who might be still interested in learning more technology and want to see Andy and I have a little bit of a conversation around Build and some of the announcements that were happening. Come join us over on the Dev Talk Show at the bottom of the hour, so about another 25 minutes from now. Hopefully Mixer is up and running on that channel as well. We did some behind the scenes trying to fix it. Worst case is join us on twitch.tv/the Dev Talk Show or over on YouTube/the Dev Talk Show. Either one of those will get you there. And come and join us. Tell us what you think of Build. What's your favorite announcement? What are you playing around with? What over the last couple of days, what was the thing that really got you all pumped and fired up to go build something? So love to see you guys come over there. And for Bill and Rob, we'll see you guys again in 2 weeks.
Yep, 2 weeks.
All right, everybody have a great night. Thanks.
Stay safe.